So, you know, our challenge with any of this stuff working towards trustworthiness is really around AI ethics, and there is a lot of work going on in the AI ethics space in order to be able to sort of provide a set of rules and foundations and guidance, if you like, for organizations that are either creating these models or are going to use these models in order to make sure that you know, they are being used and built and trained and all those other things in a predictable and safe manner. And, you know, so some definitions up front, you know, one, as it says there, you know, optimize the benefits while minimizing the risks. That's what AI ethics is really all about. And as it says, prioritizing human agency and well-being. And then the last thing of this idea is this idea of ethics by design. And, you know, just as often occurs with lots of things in IT systems, you know, security being one of the key ones, you know, this is not something you bolt on afterwards. You have to build it in all the way through the stack, as we are basically trying to do this. So you can't sort of go, right, I've created this AI model, blah, blah, blah. I've now wrapped it in some sort of ethical wrapper. Not going to work. You know, ethics has to be a key part of that model and how that model was basically built and trained from the ground up. And as we're building these models, that focus really sort of falls into these 5 areas, you know. So going through each of those, and if you like, playing them back to some of the examples that we used at the beginning, you know. So I go back to my healthcare example, you know, I have been diagnosed by an AI. It has come to conclusion X, you know. How do I know, you know, how it came to that conclusion? That's really what explainability is about. Having an ability for a human to understand why the AI came to the decision that it came to. And as part of understanding how it got to that decision, the explainability, having the transparency to basically say, and this is what that conclusion was, this is why it was done, built on how it's been designed and developed in order to do. And in the middle, we have that sort of idea of fairness, which really comes down to bias, which is how do I make sure that all of the potential individuals, if it's done on a human basis, or entities, if not, you know, how do I make sure that everyone is basically treated equally? And, you know, again, if we were to go back and search through the internet and find some news stories, there will be plenty of examples where you can find AIs making decisions which are inherently biased because that idea of fairness was not baked in when the models were originally being created and developed and trained, and the systems around them were being built in order to do this. You know, just as we have those top 3, you know, we also need to think about privacy. So again, making sure, and this relates back to the relationship between AI legislation and data protection legislation. You know, how do I make sure that consumers' data is being protected, their privacy and security is being protected, and their data is not being used for a purpose that has not been specifically allowed to be? And then how do I make sure that, you know, that system which has been built, the model that has been generated, cannot be, if you like, overrun by bad inputs, or cannot be effectively have its training modified by a so-called bad actor who is basically then flooding the system with potentially conflicting inputs that might impact the way that it delivers results going forward. So those 5 pillars of trust are key to where these things are standing. You know, so these are thoughts as to how to do it. as I said before, as the regulators start to think these things through, they're going to need to work with the technology companies, because your average regulator pretty much doesn't understand the technology. Most of the tech people probably don't understand the regulations, and that sort of combination of working together needs to be very clearly sort of laid out. And there are various examples, things. So this is a standard that was basically put forward by IBM to look at, understand how you not only define bias, but how you can then audit a model for bias. So not only do we have to say, our model is bias free because of the way we train, but how do I make sure that bias actually is bias free? How do I basically audit the model, given the speed at which these things evolve, in order to ensure that, for things like bias, for things like transparency, for things like explainability, that I am actually compliant with the standards and the rules that I'm basically trying to set myself up for.